Hello, my name is Mozell. I am the Cultural Records Assistant here at the Montana SHPO, and I will be telling you a little bit about story maps and web mapping in general and how you can apply that to your organization um, and how that applies to how it can apply to your community as a whole. So when it comes to mapping and specifically web mapping, one of the most important things to know is who your audience is as a starting baseline. Who are you targeting your work towards? Who do you want to target your work towards? And this can vary depending on specific goals or needs or desires of your organization. It can be something simple, like maybe you want to create a map to show the historic properties in your town. And in that case, maybe you want the targeted audience to be relatively broad and wide encompassing and very inviting to people that maybe don't know that much about your town, and also people that do know much about your town, potentially people that are in your town that want to participate in this. But you also may have scenarios where you're targeting towards a very specific group of people. I will show an example in the future, coming later up in the presentation, where I made a map specifically targeted towards explaining economics in Montana for fourth graders. So in that case, the specific goals and wording and layout of the map will change. Another thing you need to look at is, what is the overall purpose of your map? What are you trying to accomplish? What kind of story are you trying to tell? I mean, the way I look at maps is they're stories in and of themselves. They're a way to visualize things on the landscape in space in a format that's accessible and easy to understand for most people. And in some ways, it's very similar to charts and graphs, but mapping in some capacity is more innate for us. So in the case of, I'll go back to the example regarding the historic properties in your towns. One good example is creating, which we will explore later on in this presentation, creating a walking tour, perhaps showing your downtown area unique buildings and structures and the stories that these buildings and structures that have associated with them, and tie them to a spatial place such that you have their physical locations around the town tied and mixed in with the stories that are intertwined within them. And leading off of that, does the story need to be told? And I would argue that if you're interested in creating such a map, then yes, it does. There's always a desire to tell these stories, especially in smaller communities where maybe don't have the ability to reach out and touch the larger world. And that's especially become true as we've gone through this pandemic this past year or two. Opportunities which were more available for people to come in, tourism has suffered. Mapping and visually presenting your community on the web in some capacity can allow you to reach out and have a wider expanse of people to reach and to impact. These maps, which we'll get into, can be a great way to tell local stories and, once again, provide them to a broader audience, which normally wouldn't see them, would be perhaps only limited to if the people were to come and actually visit the location. And the question is, why specifically story maps? Why web mapping in general, right? And as the years have progressed, we've all gotten more and more intertwined with technology. People are on their phones all the time. It's just become a part of our everyday life, and it provides a great way to reach out and provide another layer of accessibility to people. And on top of that, maps provide a interactive visual element that grabs the reader's attention more than something as simple as just an article with perhaps newspaper clippings, historic clippings, or imagery and photography. Right. This provides a holistic approach to combine all of these things into a package that is more accessible and will hopefully hold the reader's interest more than an average article will. So today we'll be talking about specifically Esri as a provider for these kinds of web mapping services. There are other providers. Esri does have the advantage of being quite a monolith in the industry, and it's also what we use in our office and what I've known. So we're going to go with that option. There are other options. Those come with different pros and cons, but we're going to stick with Esri for today. So Esri has several different products within its suite for doing different types of online web mapping. The first one is the Web App Builder, which allows you to create very basic web maps which is the simple use of a CSV to kind of add that stuff in there, which we will get into a demonstration on that later. Esri also has story maps, which are used to kind of create a story, a visual narrative, and it's basically almost like a blank template where you can add in other features and widgets, which we will get into and show, that allow you to kind of create the story however you feel, more or less. They have a service called Dashboards, which allows you to display information tabularly in a statistical kind of layout with charts. Tie that also in with a web map. A good case example of that is the Montana. This is hosted by the state library, done by the state health board of health. Department of Health. And this is the Montana's COVID map, which uses the dashboard layout to kind of allow you to break down statistics, and it serves as the one of a handful of sort of web mapping things for the state to visualize the spread and the cases of COVID. There's also Experience Builder, which is a more advanced system, which I will demonstrate a little bit. It allows you to get in and really get into the weeds of customizing your web apps specifically for what you want. It has a system of resizable widgets, and you can really get into that. It's very powerful tools, but they do take substantially more work to get involved with because there is customization. So it's not the first step I would recommend if you want to get into doing web mapping. Lastly, there's also Sites, which serves kind of as a landing page for other things. As we provided examples, like using it for like a tracking system for municipalities for like tracking, tracking power lines or down or out, traffic lights that are out. People can report into the web app saying, oh, this light is out at this intersection here. It kind of serves as an overall dashboard. You could use this if you wanted to as a home base, so to speak, for your community regarding things historic preservation or anything really. And you could attach other links that go inside Esri Suites, maps, that kind of stuff, or you can attach outside to other sites within that. We won't get into that too much as it's not as relevant specifically for web mapping. It more serves as a home page, so to speak, for your initiatives. So as I showed, this is a good example of the dashboard setup. We'll get into some of the story map ones. This is a really interesting story map about the Orkney Islands specifically, and a Neolithic archaeological site that was found there. And this is an example of a web map, of a story map, which we'll get into how you can create, layered narrative combined with maps up in the corner. You can move stuff around. Imagery plays a large part of it, and it does a really good job of keeping you interested in the story by using a good combination of these multivariate factors. Here is an example which we'll get into. This is the economics map that I made for fourth graders for a project for someone else at Montana Historical Society. And this is built using Experience Builder. I'm using this bookmark widget system, which allows you to kind of jump around from different areas that are tied to. And this is very much as it is designed for fourth graders, it's very much focuses on the visual aspect rather than the narrative aspect of the text, right? And this is stuff you can all go in and change. We also have a deep, pretty representative example of a basic web app builder map. This is the Montana National Register map, which I spent time working on. And this basically just allows you to this has all of the currently updated sites that are on the National Register in Montana currently listed on here. So you can just go around, move around, and click on a point. It opens up this little pop-up box, which gives you some basic information about said listing. You can go to the actual nomination page, gives you a link to that, as well as provides you a small little imagery piece of image from the actual nomination. And this is a very simple thing to build, which I will demonstrate. Another example is some other cities have created other walking tours. This is an older style format of a walking tour, but it's still relevant. It still totally does its job. This is for the city of Tempe, Arizona, and they created a walking tour. This one is downtown Tempe, which allows you to kind of provide some imagery, and it kind of walks you through the area, showing you kind of like a path of like what to follow and places along the way. So now that we've provided some examples, we'll go ahead and take a look at what do we have to do to basically make a map. Starting from the base level of making a web app map using the web app builder. So on the home page of ArcGIS Online, you'll see it might be a little different. I have due to my organizational account with the state, this might be a little different, but we basically have these couple of tabs here up in the front. Maybe not organization, but you'll see you'll always have the option to click on map, which will send you basically to a basic web map. Here it's set up from because of my organization to the state of Montana, but may set up to a different place depending on where you're at. So first we get started here. There's a couple of options. We can go in here and change the base map in the back. So if you don't like, the look of this specific map, you can say, oh, okay, maybe we want to go to a topo map instead, and this will change the overall background look. It gives you some options in here. Our content will be displayed in here, but the first thing we're gonna have to do is, add something to put onto the map, right? And in this case example, we're going to keep things fairly simple. We're going to go with a walking tour, like I mentioned earlier, of downtown Butte. And one of the first things you need to do, well, the easiest way to do this is to basically create an Excel document, right? Listing all this stuff out. You basically just want to mark out like an ID period for these in the order that you want them to be displayed potentially. Obviously, you'd like to add a title for the property name, for the name of said property. You'll need to also display the latitude and longitude of said location. And this can be done in a variety of ways. You can get this. You can do this via Google Maps, which is pretty easy. Here. Go to Google Maps pretty easily and just basically click on a point. Oops. And this will tell you the location. At the very bottom here, the little pop-up will tell you the location of said, the latitude and longitude of said location. So you can copy that in, which makes it pretty easy to do. You'll also, if you want, like Son in the NR map, if you want a bit of description to show up in the pop-up and not just the location, you can also add a description in here as well. And that will be provided. You can also include images, providing a link to the images. We'll get into some different ways to do this as well, but one way that I find it's pretty easy is just link to external images hosted somewhere else. Makes it pretty easy. All of the information for this example is coming from the Historic Montana project. Specifically, that's where I'm sourcing my data. So once we've created our Excel, when you go in and save it, you want to go save as, but you want to save it as .csv, delineated. I can't speak. This just hopefully resolves any weird funkiness sometimes that can happen. Our ArcGIS is generally pretty good about accepting just normal Excel, not CSVs, but I have a personal habit working in GIS that generally CSVs are less of a headache. They result in less issues. So I recommend saving as a CSV to kind of cover your bases. Doesn't take much work. So once we've got that CSV, we'll need to basically add it to the web map. So there's a couple of different options here. You can browse like a little atlas, which is stuff's provided by Esri, different terrain elevation related things. Not as relevant for us. We can search for layers if they're already on there. Add layer from web if this is already hosted like a web service, which probably won't be, or if it's a CSV that's already been hosted somewhere, you can also link that in. But in this case, we're just going to use add layer for file. So pop up in the box. They prefer CSVs. I can't remember if I think they only want CSVs. So I would, like I said, I would recommend doing that. We're going to go and browse to that location, add it in, import layer. It's going to pop up with this box because it doesn't know where our coordinates are coming from. It's not smart enough to recognize latitude and longitude in our box, or if you name it something different. So we need to manually assign it to that, right? So we're going to go to our field name that says latitude. We're going to click on this location fields box and have it set to latitude. We're going to repeat the same process right below, longitude field that we've labeled as longitude. So you could name these as like lat long as well. I prefer to write them out, but that's personal preference. So now that we've imported them, it will automatically zoom to the extent that will show all of the sites that we've added. And it zoomed in quite a bit to Butte because, well, it's a fairly small area, right? Here we give the option, as you see, the little icons are different colors. There are different ways to visualize this information. You can do single signals, meaning just one color, or you can have them set up as unique. In this case, we're just going to go with the simple single location symbols. We can go in here, click on the options. And here we can click on options to change a variety of things like the transparency, how far when we zoom out, are they still visible on the map, for example. We'll also change, go into here, you can click on the symbols icon, and you can change well, basically what the symbol is, different types of shapes and stuff. So we'll go through some of these, like, well, maybe we want to do like a pin, for example. We can increase the size to like 10 pixels. So now they're having some tiny little pins, but okay, we're like, oh, well, maybe that's too tiny to see. So we'll go back into here, maybe change it to this. There we go. And some of these have more options when it comes to colors. Once you have your basic shape, you can also go fill and change. Some of these, it's not an option, they're predefined. These basic ones allow you to kind of change the options. If you'd like, maybe we're going to go with like a red fill and then like an outline that's maybe yellow or something. Make it super visible, well, obnoxiously colored, I would say. So once we've done that, we just click OK, and then it comes back out to here. We'll click done, and we've got it laid out. So now when we click on one of these boxes, there's this weird graphical error because Esri doesn't like apostrophes. So it's just something to note. In your text, it'll just show up with that missing character, basically. But when we click on one of these, this box will show up, and you'll see basically the text description in here. And we can change these fields. So say we don't want some of them to show up. We only want the description to show up, and we don't want, maybe we only want the property name and the description to show up and the image link. So what we can do is we can go over here to the contents panel. There's a couple of options here. Show the legend, which just shows the icon basically of what we're using. The table, which shows basically the same stuff that was in our CSV here, but just in a table inside the web map. And from here, we can go change style, which is what we looked at. And then what we want to go to is this three little dots at the end, more options. We're going to go to configure pop-ups and configure attributes. And this will allow us to basically display these things or not. So in this case, we're not going to display latitude, longitude, or ID. And we're going to change the field name. Okay, we'll just do this for now. Yeah. So we'll click OK on that, and we can click OK here, and we can see our changes. So now we just have property name and the description, as well as the image. But maybe we want that image to actually pop up and show up. So there's a way we can do that as well. So Popup Media is the section that we're going to look at to have the image pop up, like on the NR map. Click on this. You can see this image. That provides a helpful, handy reference. So if you're trying to look for the property, you can kind of see potentially see it based off the image as well. So we're going to go into here. We're going to click Add. We go to Image. We don't need a title for this. And what we're going to do is we're going to use So this little icon, I can't remember what it's called. It's part of it's the uppercase section on the brackets on your keyboard. Kind of specific it's called, but we're going to copy this here and to here. And this is basically just telling this thing to look for the URL in this field, attribute field, basically. When I mean attribute field, it's looking for this basically in this column. This is called image. It's looking for this specific attribute field, and then it's going to apply that link into here. So we'll click OK. Click OK again. When we click on it, there we go. We see the image show up, right? And this can provide us with the ability to hear for like, you'll see there's more info. If you click on this, it'll just go to a larger version of the image, which is hosted in this case by Historic Montana. So you could also provide another, in this case, one thing I would probably also do is provide like a source image credit. If you're maybe using you want to link out to the original context, you can do that, like image credit or description credit. You can provide that in here, and then also do a similar thing by providing a link. It'll provide a link out to wherever that's going to. So you can just click on it and it'll send the person who clicks on it to the location where that said information is hosted. Okay, so at this point, now that we've got our map here, right? We have the option now to click on it so we can save it. And in this case, we won't save it. I have a version of this, but basically you name it and you place it somewhere in your AGUL account. Roughly, I generally like to put things in folders, so this would go in here. Let's just call it test. Tags or descriptions to it. Click save. Now that saves that, right? From here, now we've got this. We've created a web map, but we need to apply it to the web app builder in order for it to be publicly visible for other people. You can send people the link specifically to this map, but it's not really. It'll look just like this for them, basically. It's not really a good outward viewer experience, so to speak. It's not really designed to be just a map to be shared. At the bare minimum, you can just pop it into a very basic web app builder and share it from there. And I think it looks much better. And it doesn't provide any confusion for anyone who doesn't, you don't want people just accidentally adding things to it. They can't save it, but it would potentially make it more confusing for them. So from here, in the top left-hand corner of the screen, there's a drop down here that says home, gallery, yada, yada, yada. We're just going to go click on home, and this will send us back to that home page. At this point, your stuff would have ended up in the content folder. So we'll go over there. And at the top here, we have these options to create app and new item. And this is what we're looking at. We're going to go in here and click create app. And you see web app builder, and these are all the programs we talked about. Experience with our sites, dashboards, story maps. We'll get into this. So in this case, we're just going to go to web app builder, and we're going to make a test. We're going to save this also in the same spot. Here, test that. Let's make another one. All right. So this will drop you into the web app builder, and there are a couple of different visual options here for like layouts and such. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the map tab, though. We'll come back to the theme. We're going to choose a web map, and we're going to go grab the test map. And this will just drop it, basically the exact map we just made into our web app builder. And here there's a couple of, like I said, there's a bunch of different options for layout, where you want certain like navigation features to be placed on the map, the overall kind of theme, so to speak, of the map. The billboard theme is probably the simplest one, in my opinion. That's kind of the one I would go for, but it really depends on what you want. For example, this jewelry box one, right? If you click, you can add widgets in here, which provides you different options. So if we go to the widgets tab, we can provide it with a bunch of different options. Provide like a really simple one is the about section, basically, which is basically like a pop-up box similar to this. Basically, this is an about section, which basically just tells you a bit about the map. You can put a description in here, like what the purpose is, how to use it, et cetera, et cetera. And I generally recommend having an about section when you have your map, just because it provides the users a real clean and easy way to kind of just view it and get some more information about it. It's kind of like your description, so to speak, of said map. But there's lots of other potential options in here. In this case, the widget would show up here. So if we just drop the widget in and call it a day like this, it'll show up on this side of the map, and it can be expanded and contracted based on this layout. This will change depending on the specific type of theme you use, basically. There's a lot you can play around with when it comes to displaying different types of widgets. There's this theme has 3 little widget buttons up here at the top, which you can add, which do different things. And it really will depend on what your kind of purpose is for your map. If you're just providing something simple, in this case, like a basic walking tour, most of this probably isn't relevant. Most of this is more relevant for higher end GIS work or analysis kind of stuff. If you're using it to display other kinds of statistics. But in this case, we're just providing a very simple, spatially bound tour that kind of shows you how to walk through downtown view. You can expand this potentially by providing adding a line feature in to kind of show the route. In this case, we won't go that because it takes a bit more work to do. This provides, if you lay out in my opinion, if you lay out your buildings, pick your buildings out in a correct order, it kind of follows a natural progression, so people can just follow. Oh, I need to go up a block and then over to go to this next building. Provides a fairly easy, natural way for people to kind of navigate without the need necessarily to have a specific line that walks them through it. So now that we've got this, we've determined, okay, we want to use this theme. We can click save, and it'll just save our web app. So if we go back to our content, go to this folder. Here's our test 2 that we made. We can just click on it and we can view application. We can also change our sharing options in here, as well as providing like a URL. So if you wanted to post a link somewhere, you can post a link there. You need to make sure you change your sharing options before you share it so that everyone can see it, because by default it's set to just the owner has access to it. So you have to set it to everyone in order to set it to public, basically, to allow other people to view it if you provide them with a link. Otherwise, they won't be able to view it. So just one thing. You can also see usage stats in here. So if you want to know like how often people are clicking on it and viewing the map, et cetera, this will provide you a breakdown based on custom date ranges all the way, and delineations up to custom date range, right? Which can be helpful if you want to track what your usage is like overall for a specific map. This is something we do kind of occasionally come back to look at for like the NR map, for example. So now that we've provided you one example, we'll get into another example of how to do kind of a very basic walking tour. I would consider that web app builder as basically kind of the bare bones option in terms of pretty minimal amount of effort to put in, but you can get a pretty decent result out of it that can be helpful to guide someone through walking, like a walking tour in the downtown region. So from here, we'll take a look at StoryMaps. Actually, before we get into StoryMaps, we'll take a look at Experience Builder real quick. This will just be a very quick overview of Experience Builder to kind of show you some of the potential things that can be done with it, without getting too much into the weeds specifically of like how to make it, because it can get kind of beyond the scope of this presentation. When you pop into there, you can basically create, there's a bunch of templates that Esri has available. By default, there's also ones that people maybe in your organization have shared, or there's templates people from HUL have created that they've also shared. We'll just stick with the default ones because they're pretty simple. Bunch of different options depending on what kind of you're looking for at a base. Once again, if you want to do something similar to this map, you could do a very similar thing with bookmarks, kind of doing the walking tour kind of format as well, using the bookmark one, which is this one. This is features in a list. This is kind of similar. Where's the bookmark one? Navigation. This one. This kind of does a similar thing, which allows you to jump from location to location that you can set up. And you can play around with all of the specific details of how to lay these things out. But like I said, we won't get too into the weeds with that because it can get a little overwhelming when it comes to all the different options available and clicking on specific things. It takes more finesse to work with. It's more similar to working in something like a visual design program like any of the Adobe products, basically, Illustrator, Photoshop, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're comfortable using those, you probably wouldn't have too big of a hard time getting into this, but it's more of an effort in design and layout than it is in specifically mapping, I would say, because you're mapping what's going to come prior and then it'll be put into this. This is more of like customizing a layout to how you want it to be set up. So from here, we'll go into story maps a little bit. And story maps are basically the system that you saw earlier. This uses allows you to create these interesting stories that are a mix of many different visual items. When you get dropped into story maps, you basically just read with this blank page, more or less. And you see this little like button right here, this plus icon, and this is the add content button. And this allows you to basically add all the cool stuff that makes story maps what they are, basically. You can add text in buttons. These can be like a link to kind of click on something. People can add a button in, add your text, and then like embed a hyperlink in here so people can click out from there. The separators basically are just more or less a visual indicator of like a story break, more or less. So it kind of helps manage your flow of your story. You can obviously add maps in. You can add images in. Image gallery, which is almost like a collage of photos. And all these photos get added into the story map itself. You can add in voice, which is a big component of this story, which is actually fairly interesting. It's about native voices in people of the Grand Canyon historically, and they use the voice section to embed SoundCloud links to kind of hook out. I believe there is also they support a couple of different embedding options. I'm not entirely sure what all of the options are, but most video or audio hosting services in some capacity that provide embedded link players will work with this. So you just need to add in that link specifically into here, and then that's how we display it. That's basically how they're displaying this specifically through SoundCloud. Right? You can also upload your audio and host it through Esri as well, if you have permission to do so. But this might be a way you can do that if you don't necessarily have permission to share, but not to like distribute it, so to speak. You also have the option to add video in. I would recommend, if you want to put video into your story map, I would recommend keeping it as short as possible, because ideally, when people see a video, they're going to click on said video, and if they see that it's 5 minutes long, there's a high likelihood that they're just going to close the page. And we know this based off of basically experience that Esri shared with us based on their statistics for people including lots of video into their story maps. I would try and limit that until probably no longer than 30 seconds, ideally. But if you can get away with using no video at all, that's I think ideal, because it kind of pulls people out of your story that you're trying to tell. You can also do embedded links into here, and you can embed a bunch of stuff in here. Basically, this is more or less any kind of link stuff you want. You can kind of pop it in here through the embedded option. You have the swipe option, which is pretty cool, which allows you to compare two maps over time that you've created. So perhaps you want to show a historic view of something and the quote-unquote modern view. I'm currently working on a project to show the expansion of the big three railroads in Montana, and I'm going to be using the swipe feature tool as a big part of showing how the railroads expanded over time, basically swiping from left to right. And showing the pop-up of potentially of towns popping up along the railroads, the general expansion of the state in combined with that. But this is also cool if you want to show, if you have aerial imagery of like your historic town, maybe from the early 30s or 40s, you can kind of compare that to modern times and kind of provide an interesting perspective on change over time. The timeline feature is kind of a scrolling bullet point kind of deal, which allows you to create dates in a timeline. So if you want to show a chronological order of some specific events, you can do that in a kind of interesting way here instead of just doing it through like a text block. It provides a more visually appealing way to do that. Then getting down to the end here, we have slideshow, which is kind of almost like a PowerPoint in many ways, built within the actual story map. It allows you to put media and text and combine with that on different slides and kind of scroll through that. I believe this web map uses a version of this this PowerPoint presentation here, sort of system in here to kind of scroll through and attach it when you're scrolling down. It'll scroll through different images. So last one, or more Sidecar, which kind of basically provides you a text block or a floating panel. I personally prefer the floating panel. Basically, it allows you to have a map or some sort of media. Basically, that can be imagery or map, basically, combined with text on the side. For basically the heavy lifting is being done by your media, and your text is complementing that in some capacity. And the last one, which is what we're here for, is the map tour option. So there's a couple of different ways to go about building a map tour. You can start from scratch, which basically what that does is you click on this. There's a couple of options here. We'll get into this in a little bit. It allows you to basically go in and say, okay, all right, we want to add a location, right? So say maybe you don't want to do the work of, or you don't know specifically where these are, or you know where they are, but you don't want to, or you don't feel like going through and creating this. There's just different options. You don't want to do this route. You can go in and say, oh, okay, all right, we want to go to, we know that there's this place in Butte, and I know it's this building right here. So we can click this, and I would recommend leaving it as automatic personally. Click add location, and this will add a location, right? And we can, well, now add our images in and text to kind of go about describing said location. We'll add number 2. We'll do the same thing. We'll be like, oh, okay, we'll go to this street over here, this building across the street. So now we have 1 and 2, and this provides said imagery. And you can just add your images in here. These have to be provided with either a link or just straight uploaded in. So that still gives you the flexibility there. You can name your title. The advantage with this is, as one thing we'll get into here in a minute, it is easier to create longer descriptions in here because there is a limitation with the next method, which I'll show, which limits the character size to 255 characters. So if you want to make longer descriptions for your specific tours, I would recommend going this route because it is a way that just works better because you're not limited by text. You can just go in here and be like, oh, I want to type tons of stuff. And it'll just keep, if the text box runs out of size, it just expands it to a new text box. So you don't have to worry about size and limitations for your actual text, which I think is a big plus. Go back into map tour here. There are, and the other way is to do this is to upload photos that are geotagged. And what that basically means is photos that have GIS or geographic information associated with them, so GPS information. So your phone, most modern phones have the option to quote unquote geotag photos, which basically ties a GIS or geographic location, latitude, longitude coordinate system to the photo. And that way you can just basically upload those photos and they'll be geotagged to that location. This is probably not the best case in this tour, in this specific case for a walking tour, probably not the best case because we're probably going to be using some historic photos. They obviously won't be geotagged. So, but that does have its particular uses. And then the last option is to start with a feature service, which basically is a kind of an extension of what we were doing over here originally. The CSV that we upload can be converted into a shape file and hosted on AGOL. And you can also attach images to that. And one advantage with this is it makes it really, really, really easy to go in and basically, once the feature service has been created, which in most cases, if you're underneath some other GIS administrator, they would have to be the ones creating the feature service. But it's not that difficult to do. Just a couple buttons to push. The one advantage with this is it'll pull all that information in immediately. without you having to do pretty much any work whatsoever. And it's basically just kind of a natural extension of this. But like I said, there is a caveat because your description is limited to 255 characters, otherwise it gets cut off, which we'll see here in a second. So that is an annoyance which currently has no workaround. Once we're in here, we have a couple different options. And this option is the same for you regardless of what kind of story map you have or what kind of route you took to basically put your data into the guided tour story map option. The bottom here are these three little dots. We have the change layout option, which allows us to change between two different kind of main layouts. Explorer is more freeform, and like they say, is good if you have tons and tons of points. It allows people to just kind of click on other areas. If you want to just show your downtown historic buildings, this is probably a better way to do it. Or if you want to show historic buildings in your town or specific lots of points, right, that are not necessarily need to be walked in a path, or if you want the reader to go in a specific direction with them, the Explorer is an option that just kind of allows you to kind of go freeform. And there's two different options. There's the grid, which you see over here, which emphasizes the pictures, and there's the list option, which kind of does a similar thing, but kind of, I think, takes up more space for not a huge benefit, to be honest. And in this case, we're going to use the guided option. And there's two options here. There's basically a map-focused option and a media-focused option. So if you want your media, such as your photos, to be more of a impacting factor on the reader, you'd go with this option. But if you want the map to be more of a impacting factor, you do with the map. In this case, we'll just go with the map because it's just, if you're doing a map tour, it's probably fine. In this case, so over here now we see the same kind of thing. We can scroll through and it'll follow from in the direction that we have set, right, for the order of these going from top to bottom. But as you see, there's no description here. So it just has the images and the title. So we need to basically tell the application that there is a description. I need you to pull from that. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on this little gear wheel. It says data options. And we'll see two boxes here. First, we'll see the data option that says place title, and this will pull from the property name attribute box, which is what we want. That's just what it's doing by default. And for description, you want to set it to this one. And you can see the titles or the name that this has been cut a bit, and that's because of the data limit thing, how the fields are formatted, so to speak. Without getting into the weeds, it's the way the data is stored, which results in like a limited text character for like the title as well as the actual description itself. So if we click on description, we can close this box. We'll now see that this description is now placed in here. But as you can see, it is cut off, right? It just kind of ends, and that's just because it's limited to characters. This isn't inherently bad, but it does come with a caveat that you'd have to keep your descriptions kind of short and sweet, which is not maybe the worst thing in the world. Now, you could combine this with a short and sweet description, maybe with like a link shortener, like a bit.ly link, to kind of link out to like a further description. If people want more information about said property, they can jump out to that. That's a potential workaround for it. One advantage with this system is that using the feature service layer, whenever you were to, if you ever were to want to add more things to this story map, so say maybe you started with, this has, I guess, it's 18 properties. So you want to expand this to 50 properties, right? All we would have to do is, add more to this, to our CSV, right? And have that converted into a feature service. And once that feature service has been updated, all of that information that we added to the feature service would get displayed on this map, and we would not have to touch this story map at all. So it makes it very simple. In order for images to be displayed via this method of using the feature service, they have to be added basically to the feature service layer. And that is something that is a bit of an extra step. I can't show you that because I don't have permissions to do that. I have to, my boss has the one that is in charge, or he has the upper level administration privileges to do that. So unfortunately, I cannot show you that, but it's not that complicated by progress. Once it's added into the content, you just kind of edit it and just drop the images in as well. There's also a variety of map options to choose from, such as checking the base map, the point color. It allows you to change between basically any point color that you want. So You can set the zoom level. I think the automatic seems to work pretty well because it kind of grabs within everything within the extent, more or less, keeps it pretty zoomed in. I personally, for this kind of map, the modern antique, I'm a big fan of. I think it looks pretty cool with the kind of old style mapping over, modern lines, basically. So there's a couple, as you see, there's a couple different ways to go about building maps. If you're not as savvy and you just want to kind of go through and make something and do it pretty easily, I'd recommend under the map tour options, the start from scratch option. It requires basically no knowledge of GIS, doesn't require you to have to know anything spatially besides where the building is, more or less. So you just have to be able to click that and put that down. Makes it very easy to get into. It is just more work going into it. And the advantage with the feature surface layer is it's a logical progression from the web map that we made. It's just one extra step to take that web map stuff and turn it into a feature surface layer that you can host on your through your story map. So if you want to expand upon that, it's pretty easy to do. I will provide with this presentation at the end. I will be providing a couple of links that provide you some resources on how to basically create good story maps provided by Esri, as well as some really good examples of story maps. And it's really, when it comes to web mapping, the biggest thing is not what can and cannot do. And there are limitations within that, of course, right? But really, it is your imagination. How can you apply your story? Like, how can you tell your story in a creative and an interesting way? And there'll be plenty. I'll have some examples to kind of show off different ways people have done things, because that's personally how I learn and how I expand on my capabilities for making stuff, is by looking what other people have done and kind of taking, oh, that's cool, that's a cool idea, taking inspiration from that, because it's basically a collective process. All right, and I think that finishes everything up. Thank you for joining me, and I will